Hare Krishna. Good morning. If it looks like I just came back from an Arctic expedition, it's because I haven't. But it's we're up on the top of the roof of a parking lot, and it's 48 degrees, and for me that's chilly. So I'm rugged up here so I could be comfortable and thinking about what I'm going to say to who's ever listening, and not how cold I am. So I'm going to start this morning by reading for the third time a paragraph from the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's one paragraph of a purport Prabhupada wrote, because it's such an important paragraph, at least I think it is, and I'll further explain why I think that after I read it to you. Only Krishna can deliver us from this material existence. Indeed, he is always trying to deliver us. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday she arjuna tishtati. He is within our hearts and is not at all inattentive. His only aim is to deliver us from material life. It is not that he becomes attentive to us only when we offer prayers to him. Even before we offer our prayers, he incessantly tries to deliver us. He is never lazy in regard to our deliverance. Therefore, this verse says, Buddhi Karunaya Namo Lalaya. It is the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord that he always tries to bring us back home, back to Godhead. God is liberated, and he tries to make us liberated. But although he is constantly trying, we refuse to accept his instructions. Sarvadamam parityajam mamekam saranam vraja. Nonetheless, he does not become angry. Therefore, he is described here as Buddhi Karunaya, unlimitedly merciful and delivering us from this miserable material condition of life and taking us back home, back to Godhead. So once again, I'm going to kind of go through this paragraph sentence by sentence and just kind of say a little something. So only Krishna can deliver us from this material existence. Okay, that's nice to know. Basically, I'm kind of giving you how my mind responds to this as I read it. Then Prabhupada says, indeed, he is always trying to deliver us. That's good news. I like that. That's nice to hear, because as we mentioned previously, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When he tries to do something, he's successful. Things that Krishna tries to do happen. I think I quoted the other day from that a paragraph in the purport of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 5, where Prabhupada says, we may think of doing something, but there may be so many impediments, and sometimes it's not possible for us to do what we like. But when Krishna wants to do something, simply by his willing, everything happens so perfectly that one cannot imagine how it is being done. So it's significant that Krishna is always trying to deliver us. He's generally very successful in whatever he attempts to do. So Prabhupada goes on to say he's within our hearts and he's not at all inattentive. So even if nobody else is paying attention to us, according to this, Krishna's paying attention to us. And Krishna's got a lot of attention. We have a little bit of attention, we're just little teeny jiva souls. Krishna has unlimited consciousness, and therefore he has the ability, he has the capacity to pay attention to unlimited jiva souls. And that's what he's doing. He's within our heart. As we heard the other morning, he's even within the heart of the living entity when he's in the atom. When we're in the body of an atom, Krishna's there with us somehow or another, and he's not inattentive. What's he doing there? Well, as we heard the other morning and we're hearing again here, his only aim is to deliver us from material life. So once again, it's basically, if you think about that sentence, it's saying that it's a very high priority for Krishna, if not his top priority. His only aim, at least his only aim in being here in the, coming and being there with us in our heart and being attentive, his aim in doing that at least is to deliver us from material life. And once again, that's very good news. When I hear that, I feel very encouraged. It makes me feel hopeful that Krishna really wants to get us out of here. Krishna really wants to deliver us from material life. That's why he's there within us in our hearts. That's why he's not at all inattentive, and his only aim. So there's great hope. Prabhupada tells this story. He heard it from his spiritual master of how somebody falls in a well In India, they have a lot of wells in the fields. And anyway, somebody falls in a well and they're crying out, help, help, help. And they're fortunate enough to have somebody hear them. So that person drops down a rope and says, okay, just tie that rope around your waist and I'll pull you out. And the person says, that I cannot do. And then Prabhupada makes the point, well, then that person's unfortunate. Because, I mean, it takes two to tango. I mean, you can, if somebody drops you down the rope, you have to at least be able to tie it around your waist or, wrap it around you somehow so that person could pull you out. So, the relevance to that is that since Krishna's only aim is to deliver us from material life. So the point is this, that we should take heart from and feel encouraged that, okay, Krishna's only aim is to deliver us from material life. At least for me, the way it works is when I read that, I feel like, okay, let me try. I don't feel hopeless. I don't feel despair. I feel like, well, it's like somebody is there with a rope. Somebody's throwing me a rope. Let me just take that rope and tie it around my waist or under my arms or whatever, so that person can pull me out. Well, the analogy is that's our sadhana. The rope is, you have to take that rope, which is your sadhana, and you have to wrap that sadhana around your life. And that's what'll pull you out of this material world. That's the metaphor, the analogy here. Just like you drop that person a rope, if he ties it around himself and ties a knot, you could pull him out. Same way, Krishna is trying to deliver us from material life. He comes as the spiritual master. The spiritual master gives us instructions how to engage in sadhana bhakti. And if we take those instructions, we have to make those instructions our life and soul. That's the equivalent of taking that rope and wrapping it around your waist and tying a nice tight knot. And so if we make the instructions of our spiritual master our life and soul, then we're going to, and then Krishna, as we just heard here, his only aim is to deliver us from material life. We're getting pulled out. We have to understand by doing that, we're in the process of being pulled out of material life, right? Okay, so then it goes on. It's not that Krishna becomes attentive to us only when we offer prayers to him. Even before we offer our prayers, he incessantly tries to deliver us. So that's really amazing. Now, Krishna is trying to figure out how he's going to deliver all these conditioned souls, even when they're not interested in getting delivered. So once again, very encouraging. Very, very encouraging. I remember once I heard a lecture that Hridayananda Maharaj gave here in Los Angeles, and at one point in the lecture he mentioned about the God of 3 O's. And I never heard that before, and then he went on to explain what that was, that it's a very common conception of God that he's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, the God of 3 O's. So here we're hearing about the omnibenevolence of Krishna, God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is, a description of omnibenevolence, that even before we offer our prayers, even we're not interested in going back to Godhead, Krishna he's thinking about it. He's trying to figure out a way, how do I get these souls back to Godhead? How do I attract them back again? That's really far out. I mean, just to give an analogy to help us appreciate that point. Imagine here, like take America for instance, okay? Imagine there's some really serious felons, really hardened criminals who have committed crimes like rape, murder, armed robbery, etc., child abuse, okay? And they're sentenced for, life sentences in prison or some heavy sentence. And you imagine that you had a president or somebody that was always thinking about, those poor, misguided, guys in prison. We have to figure out a way to help. How can we reform them? The average person would think, hey, throw them away, lock them up and throw away the key. Right? And that would be a fair way to be thinking, considering the heinous crimes they committed. But if somebody is thinking, wow, those poor guys, they weren't in their right mind. We really have to try to help them. We really have to try to help them see the light. That's a very compassionate person. Well, that's what we're hearing here. We're hearing about Krishna and how super compassionate he is. that we're not interested. We don't deserve it. We're not interested. Or at least it's saying at this point we're not interested, and still he's interested to try to help us, even when we're not interested to be helped. Or even before we're interested to be helped, Krishna is interested to help us. That's an example of omnibenevolence. Then it goes on to say here that Krishna is, it makes the point. Prabhupada says Krishna is unlimitedly merciful. And he's always trying to get us back to Godhead. But he said, but although he's constantly trying, we refuse to accept his instructions. Well, that's when I hear that, that's very unfortunate. But anyway, that's the case. But now listen to, but then Prabhupada goes on to give us what Krishna's response is to that. That, here he is, he's continually trying to get us out of material life. Even before we're praying, even before we're interested, he's trying, and we're not responding, we're not reciprocating. And so what is Krishna's response? Does he get, as I mentioned yesterday, does he get frustrated and say, to hell with you guys? I got better things to do with my time? No. It's just, nonetheless, he does not become angry. He doesn't get frustrated. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't give up. He doesn't say, well, quit forget about this project. Let's go dance with the gopis or something like that. No. It says here, he's unlimitedly merciful in delivering us from this miserable material condition of life and taking us back home, back to Godhead. He perseveres. Krishna perseveres. And that's why he's referred to here by Prabhupada as unlimitedly merciful. Despite the fact that we are not cooperating, he is persevering and trying to get all the living entities back home, back to Godhead. And by the way, that is what we want, whether we know it or not. That's what we should be wanting. We should be wanting to get out of here, to go back home, back to Godhead. This place is crazy. If you haven't kind of figured that out, noticed that yet, it's really, and unlike the fairy tales you read when you're a kid, or that your mother or your father would read to you when you're a kid, at the end of the story it says, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, we don't. We don't live happily ever after. Nobody lives happily ever after here in this material world. Even the people who have the best run at the whole thing, still, they get old, sick, and die. I'm not going to give you examples, but you can come up with your own. I have some in my head, but anyway. So anyway, I just wanted to start off with this because this is a really important paragraph. It's from the 8th canto, chapter 3, text number 17, the prayers of Gajendra. I highly recommend everybody, in their first opportunity, have a look at it, read it yourself, think about it, and you can make it part of, at least I've made it part of my daily sadhana to read this paragraph and think about it, because it's such an important concept. So many important ideas are being presented here by Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so moving on. Yesterday we were talking about implicit faith and provisional faith. So Prabhupada was himself was certainly an implicit faith devotee, and the first time I became in contact with that, the first expression of Prabhupada's implicit faith that I became aware of was what I found in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela chapter 7. Actually, when Prabhupada gave us the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he didn't do it in complete, in the ordinary sequential way. And he brought out, the first part of the Chaitanya Charitamrita that come out was the 7th chapter of the Adi Leela. It came out as a book, Lord Chaitanya and 5 Features. Then Prabhupada backtracked and he brought out a book, Chaitanya, I can't remember, it was a big hardback book with the yellow cover. Anyway, it was chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then the next book that came out when they started bringing out the set of Chaitanya Charitamritas was the Adi Leela Volume 2, and then he went back and gave Adi Leela Volume 1. So this chapter was Prabhupada picked this chapter out of all the chapters in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and gave it to us first. Anyway, in that chapter there appears this statement by Lord Chaitanya. He says, I firmly believe in these words of my spiritual master. The words were that he should always chant Hare Krishna and give it to other people. So Lord Chaitanya says, I firmly believe in these words of my spiritual master, and therefore I always chant the holy name of the Lord alone and in the association of the devotees. The holy name of Lord Krishna sometimes causes me to chant and dance, and therefore I chant and dance. Please do not think that I do it, that I intentionally do it. I do it automatically. So Prabhupada says in the purport, referring to this, he says, believing in the words of his spiritual master, he, Lord Chaitanya, introduced the Sankirtan movement. Now, he brings himself into the picture. He says, just as the present Krishna conscious movement was started with belief in the words of our spiritual master, he wanted to preach. We believed in his words and tried to somehow or other fulfill them. And now this movement has become successful all over the world. Therefore, faith in the words of the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the secret of success. So in other words, we could, if you think about what Prabhupada's saying here, Prabhupada made the leap. He made the leap of faith. Prabhupada's mood was not, well, let me, engage in this process, and when I start getting some good results, I'll ratchet it up a bit, and then, as my experience gets better, then I'll surrender more. No, that was not Prabhupada's mood. Prabhupada's mood was, I'm going for it. I'm just like, he uses Lord Chaitanya as an example of somebody who did the same thing, and he's putting himself in the same category in there, in the sense that he was prepared to just believe in the words of his spiritual master, and even without knowing whether he was going to be successful or not, or he had that implicit faith. Prabhupada acted upon implicit faith, and he got the result, as we're going to be hearing here in that same purport. Right at the end, Prabhupada says, we believed, once again referring to his faith in the words of his spiritual master, we believed in the words of our spiritual master and started in a humble way, in a helpless way. See, so he's making it clear that humble way. He had no facility. He had nothing. He just, all he had was the faith in the words of his spiritual master. Prabhupada didn't have money to start the Krishna conscious movement. Prabhupada didn't have really connections. He wasn't getting cooperation from his god brothers in the Gaudiya Math. Nothing. He had the instruction, and he had faith in that, let me just try to execute the words of my spiritual master, and everything will work out. So he started in a humble way and in a helpless way, literally. But then he goes on to say, but due to the spiritual force of the order of the Supreme Authority, this movement has become successful. See? So Prabhupada, as I said, was very much an implicit faith, a realized. Prabhupada, I don't know if it's correct. I don't think it's correct to say that Prabhupada, because, Prabhupada's a Nitya Siddha, but it seems like Prabhupada was presenting himself as not that, at least initially, but so just for the sake of the Leela, I think we could take it that here's somebody who, at least according to how he's presenting himself, is presenting himself as somebody who wasn't realized in that implicit faith, but then by taking shelter of the instruction of his spiritual master and completely surrendering into it, he became realized. That implicit faith became a fully realized that was the way to go. And Prabhupada experienced this, but Prabhupada experienced that but due to the spiritual force of the order of the Supreme Authority, his movement, he became successful. Well, he was always successful, but he became successful in his mission, and his movement became successful. So Prabhupada is the outstanding example of having implicit faith in one's spiritual master. So that's there. Since I'm not. Yesterday I was talking about provisional faith. Well, that's good. Well, the point I'd like to make there is that I think I touched upon it yesterday. Was there's ideal standard in Krishna consciousness. You have the ideal standard and you have minimum requirement. Okay, so let's apply that idea to. I'll give you an example of that before we apply it to what we're talking about. Just like the ideal standard for chanting is Kirtaniya Sadahari, to chant the holy name constantly. And if you listen to Prabhupada's lectures and read letters and, read his books, you'll see instructions where there are places where Prabhupada says you should chant constantly. You should chant without ceasing. And, there are places like that. Yet at the same time, you'll find, if you listen to this, lectures and letters and books, you'll find places where Prabhupada says, and devotees in the Krishna conscious movement should chant 16 rounds. In other words, there's places where you could see he's preaching that, hey, good idea to chant constantly. And there's places where he's, preaching in such a way as he's presenting that, because of the people in the West aren't used to chanting on beads and they're not used to, this type of, worship. Then Lord Chaitanya is very merciful. He's made a concession that everybody just has to chant 16 rounds. So there's both things to preach. And when you're hearing them, the two different instructions, you're feeling like, this is correct. I mean, it's either one, So anyway, that's an example of the ideal standard is chanting constantly, but the minimum required is chanting 16 rounds. So in the same way, applying this to the topic of discussion here, the ideal standard is to have implicit faith. I want to be clear on that. That is the ideal standard, to follow in the footsteps of Prabhupada and other great acharyas, and to try to have implicit faith in what the spiritual master is saying. That's what Prabhupada did, and that's what he's recommending, and that's, we're being mostly encouraged in that. That is the ideal standard. But if we're not able to beat on that standard, better than having no faith, obviously, is provisional faith, in the sense that, what we were talking about yesterday, that you just take it as an experiment. Take it like, okay, well, let me try this and see what happens. And now, you might, upon hearing me say that, you might be thinking, oh, wait a second, Bhrgupati Das, I think you're saying something that Prabhupada didn't talk about. And, it's a little bit bogus. But no, I'm going to read you something that Prabhupada said to support my point here. And as I'm finding this thing I'm going to read you, I'll give you an example to support this point of my own invention. But then I'll read what Prabhupada has to say, which I will find in a second. Okay, the example goes like this. I'm sure it's here. Sorry for the delay, folks. Well, okay, the example is back in here in America, in the early days of the country, back probably it's over 100 years ago or something like that. Sure, maybe more like 200 years ago, when the settlers were settling new territories and stuff like that. Schools were very basic, and the setup in a school was you had a building, and you had a teacher, and then you had all the students, and all the students were there in that one. All the students were there in that one building, and there was one teacher. And the way they did it was because everybody, there was kids there who were like in kindergarten. It was kindergarten through high school in that one schoolroom with one teacher. So the way they did it was the teacher would get there and the kids would come up one by one, and the teacher would work with them one by one. Notice everybody was on a different level. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Prabhupada was preaching to everybody, and he was preaching. Well, he was preaching to people who were all on different levels, and he was preaching different levels. See, he was preaching different levels of Krishna consciousness. He was putting it all out there because Prabhupada was trying to help everybody, no matter what level they were on. If they were on a high level, great. Prabhupada, here's instructions for you. And if they're on a lower level, okay, great. Well, here's instructions for you. Whatever level you were on, Prabhupada was prepared to, anybody who showed up at the school was going to get instructions, so to speak. So anybody who came forward to participate in Prabhupada's Krishna consciousness movement, regardless of what level they were on, they would get instruction to help them go from where they were at to a higher level. And I really wish I could find this. Okay, found it. This is an excerpt from a lecture Prabhupada gave. And he says something which I found very interesting when I found it. He goes here. He's talking about let me read you this. Okay. He's talking about asuras and yeah, is that loud enough? Okay. All right. So, and what the proper standard for the devotional service. Anyway, I'll just dive in here in the middle. He says, every educational progressive method has do's and do nots. So the asuras, they do not know what they should do and what they should not do. That is asura. And a devotee, he knows what to do and what not to do. Now Prabhupada's going to get into the details, and then he's going to make a really interesting point. He says, there is no illicit sex. That is do not. But there is do also, that if you want sex life, then get yourself married according to religious principle, and get a wife and beget nice children. That is do. And no illicit sex. That is do not. Side by side. And then Prabhupada goes, he says, you do not take intoxicants. That is, do not. But you take Krishna prasadam and be intoxicated with Krishna's love. In other words, nothing's prohibited, but everything's regulated for higher achievement. Okay? And Prabhupada says, so you take Krishna's prasadam and become intoxicated with Krishna's love. That is, do. Similarly, you do not indulge in gambling. And this is the part that I found really super interesting. He says, you do not indulge in gambling, but you indulge in gambling. What is that gambling? That gambling is dedicate your life to Krishna and see the result. Just make an experiment. That's what he's saying here. Dedicate your life to Krishna and see the result. He says that is also gambling. Prabhupada refers to that here as gambling. He says he says it twice. He says that is also gambling. That is also gambling. Because everyone is engaged in his own business. But if he's advised, give up this business and you take to this Krishna consciousness, that is also gambling for that person, right? For him. Because he does not know what will happen. See, so this is Prabhupada talking about provisional faith here. Prabhupada's encouraging, Prabhupada's recommending, okay, at least do this much. At least, gamble. Make this gamble. You're gambling so many different ways. Here's the way you could dovetail your propensity for gambling. Gamble. Dedicate your life for Krishna and see the result. Make the experiment. Take up the process. Ado shraddha, tato sadhusanga, tata bhajana kriya. Come forward. Show an interest. Associate with the devotees. Engage in bhajana kriya, etc. And see the result. Prabhupada says that's the proper way to dovetail the propensity, because as conditioned souls, we have those propensities, for illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, gambling. That's the way to dovetail the gambling propensity. And we heard about how to dovetail some of those other propensities. So I thought that was pretty far out. So once again, I'm presenting this in the broader context of faith. We're talking about faith. Ideally, we want to have implicit faith, and but if you're not there, well, follow that instruction of Prabhupada. Have provisional faith. Have the gambling faith. Just make that gamble. Dedicate your life to Krishna and see the result. Okay, it's hard for me to. I'm going to go through these notes one after the other. probably the most practical way for me to do it, because I don't have it organized as a flowing stream of points one after the other on the same theme. So, but they're all interesting, and they're all related. So in this next one, this is an excerpt of just a few sentences I'm going to read from a purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and unfortunately I neglected to mark down what canto and what chapter and what text, but it could be easily found on the database. Anyway, Prabhupada here is making the point. We're talking about how merciful Krishna was and how he's inconceivably benevolent. Well, here's one more little piece of information that adds to that image. Prabhupada says here in this purport, he says, when the living entity prefers to misuse his independence and glide down towards nescience, the all-merciful Lord first of all tries to protect him from that trap. I found that very interesting sentence. One, because once again, it kind of gives us information about how merciful Krishna is. That, and also it seems to me to indicate that we started off in the spiritual world, because he says when the living entity prefers to misuse his independence and glide down towards nescience, the all-merciful Lord first of all tries to protect him from the trap. But when the living entity persists in gliding down towards down to hell, the Lord helps him to forget his real position. Actually, it's not very strong on that point. Somebody could argue that could happen when being already in the material world. But it's interesting that Krishna does try to talk us out of it, so to speak. The Lord helps the falling living entity, but then when this is the next sentence is interesting also. But when we're determined not to take Krishna's advice and to not misuse our independence, then it says here, the Lord helps the falling living entity glide down to the lowest point, just to give him the chance to see if he is happy by misusing his independence. It's like, Krishna first of all tries to talk us out of it. He tries to say, hey, no, you don't want to do that. You're not going to be happy doing it. But if we're really stubborn, if we're really adamant, no, I want to do this. I want to try to become happy like this. And Krishna goes, okay, all right, go for it. But you're going to see, you're not going to be happy. And that's what happens. Of course, we glide down to the lowest point, and as a result of misusing our independence, and that's what this material world is all about. It's an enactment of this point here, that Krishna, we all of us, all the souls here, the conditioned souls in the material are having the opportunity to experience for them firsthand that we can't become happy as a result of misusing our independence. Anyway, then in the next paragraph after that, there's a little bit more on that same point. It says, as an obedient servitor of the Lord, Brahma creates all these, referring to the different types of nescience, as a matter of necessity. But he is not happy in doing so, because a devotee of the Lord naturally does not like to see anyone falling down from his real position. So once again, it's not like somebody might. Sometimes people raise the accusation or make the accusation: how is God merciful? How is he benevolent? How could you say that? Because look how people are suffering here. Well, the example is, or the analogy Prabhupada would always give is that he's very fond of using that example of prisons and criminals like that. And you can't blame the government for creating a legal system and having as part of that consequences for people who don't follow it. It's not, if I go out and try to rob a bank today, and as a result of that get caught and wind up in jail for the next 20 years, I can't blame that on the government. That's not the government's fault. That I decide to become a criminal and break the law, right? But in some ways, they're the ones that put you in the prison. Yeah, I deserve to be put in the prison. So in the same way, you can't blame these higher authorities like Lord Brahma and Lord Krishna, for our suffering. Where they don't like it. They actually don't want to see us, suffer like this. But they're basically just doing a job. That's what's being pointed out here. The devotees of the Lord, they don't like to see anyone falling down from their position. But of course, when living entities, when jivas do fall down from their position, they have to perform their duty, and they have to do what's required to rehabilitate them. And that's what's happening in this material world. This is a penitentiary. It's a place where the souls are placed to become rehabilitated, reformed. And as part of that, as I mentioned yesterday, we're experiencing that. You say, well, that doesn't sound very, compassionate or benevolent or loving. Well, it is. It's tough love. It's a kind of love, but it's tough love. It's love, but it doesn't seem like love to us, but it is love, because that's what's going on. We're being reformed. We're being rehabilitated so that Krishna can take us back to Godhead, take us back to the spiritual world, get us out of this, place once and for all. That's what's happening here. It's hard for us to, most people, if it's even hard for devotees to understand that sometimes, to really appreciate that, it's for the non-devotees, they're totally bewildered. They don't have a clue that what's going on, but that's our understanding. That's what's going on. That this is a place for tough love. Krishna's got us here. We're here to learn a lesson. We're here to learn a lesson, and when we learn that lesson, then we can go back to Godhead. But until we learn that lesson, we got to stay here and be educated. And sometimes most of the time, it's going to be, not a pleasant experience for most jiva souls. But hey, that's what we signed up for by coming here. So we got to deal with it. Anyway, moving on. Actually, there is something I could add to that point if I can find it really quickly. Okay, got it. Now, the devotees, we're aware, most devotees would be aware of what I just said. And they're also aware that even when you become a devotee, it's not like everything becomes peaches and cream overnight. It's an ongoing struggle. But the devotee, understanding the philosophy, he doesn't mind. He doesn't begrudge that. He doesn't feel resentful that even that. Okay, I'm surrendering. I've decided. I'm taking it up. I'm engaging in devotional service, but still I'm experiencing suffering in life here in the material world. Well, how? No, his attitude is stated very nicely, and the Prabhupada refers to in the Nectar of Devotion. This is the devotee's attitude towards what he has to, the experience of being, what's the word? Waiting for that time when he's fully freed by Krishna from this material world and taken back to Godhead. Anyway, this is from the Nectar of Devotion. It says in the 10th canto, 4th chapter, verse 8, it is said, "My dear Lord, any person who is constantly awaiting your causeless mercy to be bestowed upon him, and who goes on suffering the resultant actions of his past misdeeds." That's the devotees are prepared to do that. In other words, they know that, okay, even despite the fact that I've surrendered to Krishna, still I'm going to have to go on suffering the results of my past misdeeds. But while doing that, they're offering respectful obeisances from the core of their heart, and that makes them eligible to become liberated. And that's their rightful claim. So Prabhupada says, sort of giving a little purport on that in the Nectar of Devotion, he says, this statement of the Srimad Bhagavatam should be the guide of all devotees. A devotee should not expect immediate relief from the reactions of his past misdeeds. No conditioned soul is free from such reactionary experiences, because material existence means continued suffering or enjoying of past activities. If one has finished his material activities, then there's no more birth. This is possible only when one begins Krishna-conscious activities, because such activities do not produce reaction. Therefore, as soon as one becomes perfect in Krishna-conscious activities, he is not going to take his birth again in this material world. A devotee who is not perfectly freed from the resultant actions should therefore continue to act in Krishna consciousness seriously, even though there may be so many impediments. That's important right there. So in other words, don't be impatient, don't get discouraged. Okay, I'm engaging in devotional service and still I'm, suffering in this way, that way, this way, that way. Yeah, that's okay. It's because you're not completely, perfectly freed from the resultant actions of your sinful activities. Just continue. As Prabhupada says, just continue to act in Krishna consciousness seriously and tolerate those impediments. And it says here, when these impediments arise, one should simply think of Krishna and expect his mercy. So just be tolerant. Just hang in there. We're just getting, we deserve it. You just have to be prepared to be tolerant. Push on with your devotional service. Don't give up, and just pray to Krishna. Pray to Krishna. Prabhupada says, when such impediments arise, you should simply think of Krishna and expect his mercy. That is the only solace. That's it. That's the only acceptable attitude. That is the only solace. And Prabhupada says if the devotee passes his days in that spirit, it is certain that he's going to be promoted to the abode of the Lord. By such activities, he earns his claim to enter into the kingdom of God. The exact word used in this verse is dayabhak. Dayabhak refers to his sons becoming the lawful inheritor of the property of the father. In a similar way, a pure devotee who is prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulations in executing Krishna conscious duties, that's the price. We got to pay some price. We screwed up, and that's the price we got to pay in order to get back to the spiritual world. We have to be prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulations in executing Krishna conscious duties, because we become lawfully qualified to enter in the transcendental abode. So I heard devotees say, maybe Prabhupada said, and they were quoting, but anyway, that, like for instance, in this example, all a son has to do to become the lawful inheritor of the property of his father is stay alive. So if we just stay alive in Krishna consciousness, and staying alive in Krishna consciousness means continuing to practice. You got to continue to practice Krishna consciousness, chant your rounds, follow the regulative principles, engage in service. That's staying alive. If you just do that, then you're the rightful, then you've earned the right. You're the lawful inheritor of the property of your father. Then you've earned the right to get Krishna's mercy and go back home, back to Godhead. Okay. There's one here I saw as I was going through all these. I'll try to find. I just wanted to make the further point that, because since we're talking about, the kind of the process of engaging in devotional service and what's involved in, there was one excerpt I had here from a conversation that took place here in Los Angeles up in Prabhupada's room, where where somebody brought to Prabhupada's attention, actually it was Vishnu John. Then, I don't know if he was a sannyasi at that point or if he was still a brahmachari, but he brought up the point to Prabhupada. He raised the point that Prabhupada, it's difficult. It's difficult. And this was Prabhupada's kind of response. He didn't, he wasn't expressing that he personally was having difficulty, but he was kind of speaking on behalf of the conditioned souls, who might, become interested in Krishna consciousness. And anyway, here's what he said, Vishnu John. How will it be possible, Prabhupada, for a man whose mind is clouded to constantly chant Hare Krishna? A man who's always thinking thoughts about family, friends, country, nation. So how's a person in that category, how's he going to become Krishna conscious? How's he going to become interested, attracted? Prabhupada says, yes, think of those things. He goes, yes, think of. At the same time, chant. Two things will go on, and this will conquer. And Prabhupada laughs. He says, as Maya is forcing you to drag you from this Krishna consciousness, you also force Maya by chanting Hare Krishna. There is fight, and Maya will go away. So, Prabhupada's acknowledging it's a challenge. This is not a cakewalk. Krishna consciousness is not for people with a weak stomach. No, you got to be prepared to roll up your sleeves and do the work. Prabhupada's acknowledging that, people start off as conditioned souls. You're going to start off, you're thinking about your family, your friends, your country, your nation. You have all sorts of material attachments. It's not like first let me get free from these material attachments and then I'll take up Krishna consciousness. It doesn't work like that. While you're still materially attached, you have to just dive in there. You have to jump in, you have to dive in there, roll up your sleeves and as Prabhupada said, fight. And he actually, he quotes that verse, Daivahi Yesha Gunamaya Mama Maya Darachaya Mamavya Papajante Mayami Tamtidantita. Then he says, the Maya is very strong. She'll force you, entice you to the other path. But if you do not stop, if you chant loudly, then he goes, digresses, he says, just like Haridas Thakur was chanting, and Maya could not victimize him. You know that. What was his stand? Simply chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Maya could not entice. Maya failed. Maya became his disciple. He did not become Maya's disciple. Oh yeah, I was saying, I was just about to say, I thought Prabhupada gave this example, and I couldn't find it, but now here it is. He says, this is tug of war. Prabhupada uses the example. Think about that. Everybody knows what a tug of war is. You have the rope, and you have, on one side, you have people pulling it one way, and on another side, you have people. So, very interesting metaphor that Prabhupada's giving here, that Maya is trying to pull us to her side, and we have to pull the other way. We have to pull the other way, and for us, that pulling the other way is taking shelter of the Maha Mantra. The more we try to take shelter of the chanting, well, specifically Prabhupada's saying that here, but in general, the more we take shelter of the Prabhupada's instructions, and specifically the chanting, that is the equivalent of us pulling, tugging to the good side, and trying to counteract Maya's pulling us to the illusionary side. So Prabhupada says, don't be afraid of Maya. Simply enhance chanting and you will conquer. Simply become more serious about following the instructions of the spiritual master, and we will conquer Maya according to that. Prabhupada says, that's all. Narayana parasarve na kutishyana bhijati. We are not afraid of Maya because Krishna is there. Krishna says, Kuntaya pratajanahi name bhakta pranashati. So that's what we're supposed to meditate on. We're supposed to remember that. We're supposed to remember that Krishna says, O Arjuna, declare it boldly, my devotee will never perish. And we have to remember that and be prepared to just kind of box it out. He says, and then Prabhupada's going, you just declare, it means Krishna speaking to Arjuna, my devotee will never be vanquished by Maya. Maya cannot do anything. Simply you have to become strong. And what is that strength? Chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, loudly. Yes. So Prabhupada's really giving a very strong emphasis here on the importance of chanting Hare Krishna in general, and particularly for these people who are like in that, as people describe, how Vishnu John was describing, who still have material attachments. They're thinking of family, friends, country, nation. Take shelter of the Maha Mantra. That's the beginning. As we mentioned yesterday, Sevan Mukhe Jivado. The devotional service begins with the tongue. The tongue has two functions. One is tasting and one is vibrating. So, don't be we shouldn't try to be Paramahamsas prematurely. Start from the beginning. The beginning is taking shelter of the chanting, taking shelter of taking prasadam. Get a strong foundation, a strong foothold in those things, in those important foundational activities of Krishna consciousness, and then things will build up from there. Okay, so that's that one. Very nice thing. Okay, kind of elaborating a little bit more on that point. Let's see here. I want to figure out how to lead into this. Well, I guess this is, I'll present this along the lines of further information about why we should never feel discouraged. We should never lose enthusiasm. This is something, this is along the lines of, how Krishna is inconceivably benevolent. These are some very down-to-earth statements Prabhupada makes which support that point. It's an excerpt from a lecture. I'm just going to read a couple sentences. Prabhupada says, even though somebody comes to Krishna with some purpose which is not moral, but the man or woman who comes there, he or she becomes purified. Notice the point is, any association with Krishna, in one sense, is good. Here he said, in another lecture, Prabhupada says, he's talking about Putana, and he says here, and Krishna is ready to respond to any rasa you want to deal with him in. That is Krishna's position. So what to speak of those who are loving? Just like Putana. Putana wanted to kill Krishna. That was her purpose. But when Putana was killed by sucking her breast and life both, then Putana was given the position of Krishna's mother. Because Krishna took it the bright side. Krishna thought, whatever her intention may be, she came to me just like a mother, and I sucked her breast. Therefore, she is my mother. She came as enemy, but Krishna did not take the inimical side, the motherly side. Tejiya sam nadoshaya. Similarly, the gopis, they came to Krishna out of lust, but out of lust they became purified. Just like the sun. The sun, Prabhupada says soaks, but evaporates. The sun evaporates water from the urinal, but the sun is not polluted, but the urinal becomes sterilized. So this is the process. Now here Prabhupada is going to enunciate the principle that is being alluded to here, described here. This is the process, or this is the principle. You try to approach Krishna some way or other, then your life is successful. That's it. That's the principle. That's an important point. This is Prabhupada says, this is the process. It's the process, it's the principle. You try to approach Krishna some way or other, then your life is successful. Prabhupada says it doesn't matter. Kamat, Krodhat, Bhaya, it doesn't matter. Lust, anger, fear. And here's something interesting. Prabhupada says, and what to speak of those who are constantly engaged in love with Krishna? And then he goes, everything is love. As soon as you divert your attention to Krishna, that is love. It may be perverted. That's kind of far out. In other words, well, I'm not sure what, in other words. But as soon as you divert your attention to Krishna, that is love. I have to think about that one a little bit more, exactly what Prabhupada means by that. But I think it relates to the point he's just making, that Krishna is so auspicious that this is, any way you associate with Krishna, you're going to be benefited. So your love for Krishna, you'll make progress towards reawakening your dormant love for Krishna. But anyway, on this other point about try to approach Krishna some way or other, then your life is successful. In this other lecture I started off reading from Prabhupada, in one sentence he says, so anyone with any aim, if he approaches Krishna or Rama, he becomes anagam, which means sinless. So, I like that. I meditate on these, just on a few words like that. It's very powerful. Anyone with any aim. It's very all-inclusive. Anyone. Whatever your motive is, if you approach Krishna and you stick with it, you become sinless. So once again, very encouraging. Okay. Give me a break for a second, okay? And just to organize my thoughts a little bit again, and then we'll resume. What happened?